all of spells and then man crit going in the deck and being tutored out again can be very impactful, because when the deck does that, you get that real, like, why aren't we funding this reaction, right? Like, whenever that interaction occurs, you struggle to understand why any other build of Priest would be played, right? The ability to cheat out Enraged Man Crit and that ability, and particularly in a matchup against Warlock, having a 3/7 on the board is just right where you want to be, because not only is it Soul Rend resistant, it's also Unstable Shadow Blast resistant. It's resistant to all removal that they play in their deck at that point. So it's certainly something that you do want to be looking for as aggressively as possible with this deck. Does have Thrive in the opening hand, but without access to the Mancrick itself, that is a little bit useless overall, and he's instead thrown that away and picked up one of the most aggressive openings that is possible for this deck, even supported by Cult Neophyte as well, which could mean a ton of damage going through thick and fast in this early game.
Yeah, just the sheer fact that double Void Touch turn 1 into Neophyte turn 2 means I'm pretty confident to say something will stick for Dragonmaw Overseer to then buff turn 3. So this is looking about as good as it's going to get here for Seiko, especially with that turn 2 just being able to negate the potential answers that would come out for these minions. Although we can see touch here from Floki, what do you think here? I'll actually tap or play a Cult Neophyte to try and challenge and force a hero power out onto?
I think I'd tap. I think we're already in the position where Floki should understand that he wants Soul Rend in this position, because obviously you know the expected turn this turn is going to be hero power and push at this point, to which I think, you know, Seiko has just kind of won that exchange in that position, right? Because he's pushing 6, you haven't tapped. Obviously the tap hurts you enormously with the Void Touch attendances on the board, but it's a price that I think you have to pay, because I don't really see how the game has progressed in Floki's favor based on this play that he's just made.
Also, though it hurts you a lot, it does increase your quest progression significantly as well.
Yeah, I will say one attendant is quite nice for that, right? Because then you can just tap twice and it's 3 each. But with 2, you're over completing quest anyway, and it doesn't carry over onto the next one. So it is just kind of straight up damage at that point.
Oh, this is rough. What Floki wouldn't give for a Drained Soul?
1 drop off the top would be the dream for Seiko. Doesn't find it though. Okay.
What if he just hero powers again? I know that feels really weird with the cards he's got in hand. He can shuffle first with the one of the Traveling Merchants and just hero power and push another 4.
6.
6, yep. Look, Priest has thrown me through some loops today, so okay. It's been a roller coaster of a ride.
It really has.
Because it kind of plays around Soul Rend anyway, right? If Floki has to Soul Rend 2 1/3s, there's Raise Dead and then more stuff from Seiko turn 4. I actually really like the hero power with the trade. With the tradable, should I say. Not try and confuse too many people.
Yes.
It just ticks boxes.
I mean, thanks developers for calling an actual mechanic in the game trading. Because now it's like, yeah, so I think you just go face and trade this turn. Like, what are you saying? It's nonsense.
Yeah, I like this a lot. Because now even the good card for Floki isn't that good. Does get a Drained Soul now, though, which helps.
Good sequencing, of course. Classic wisdom tells you to draw first, but in that occasion he takes 1 less damage by ripping the Drain Soul on the first occasion.
Was it good sequencing?
Go on.
Well, he would have gone to 4 out of 6, right?
Yes.
He tapped first, which means next turn tap, procs hero power? Procs hero power, procs quest?
Well, next turn there's there's still Void Touch attendants on the board, right? So next turn you're tapping for 3 anyway.
Sure, he has the choice of sequencing this turn. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, sure. Always got the quest numbers on my mind. Ugh. It's just horrible, isn't it?
Yep.
Got to to be tap. As Sol quite rightly pointed out, this will, of course, finish the quest for him. Does get Tams in. So what's that? 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12? Does he have to wait and try and get value from Tams in next turn? I think so, right?
Facing down 9, 12 from the hero power. He knows that Raised Deads have been found as well, though, is the problem, right? So if Raised Dead plus additional Void Touch comes down, maybe that's too much damage at that point. However, if Raised Dead plus Neophyte comes
down, that's my worry.
then things start to get a little bit exciting.
So strong.
So how much is this now? That would be 4, that would be 5, so that's 9 plus 5 from a hero power, so 14 would be the max this turn. Not anymore now he's played the Neophyte, but didn't really end up mattering anyway.
I like the sequencing as well, because second Neophyte, he could still get soul rendered that turn, and he misses out on, what, 4 damage from the hero power, so yeah, I like this sort of just dripping them out turn by turn now for Seiko. Still giving some respect to Soul Rend at this point in the game.
He died.
So you can Tams in Double Drain to kill off the Void Touched.
Yeah.
Puts him to 16.
16. There's one more Void Touch that he knows about in hand, because I think the Void Touch Neophyte was guaranteed as the outcome, right? So that would mean there is 7, 10 from the hero power coming back the other way. So yeah, it's the only play that I can see that even remotely keeps him alive. Unless he just wants to... No, even then, if he taps, Soul Rend costs 5 off the top, right? So there's not even that out available to him.
It just has to be Double Drain Soul and hope for some kind of miracle. Still in a bad way. Okay, he's just going to concede, going to tap out on this one here, and Seiko gets off to a very smooth victory there in game number 1.
No, he was right, because it didn't keep him alive in the end, because there's still the one Void Touch alive on the board, because Drain Soul is coming back as 1 from the Neophyte interaction that we love to talk about, right?
Of course, yes, it was only ever 1, you're right.
Yeah, so we were talking about before with touch, it might have been able to do some work, as we were talking about on the previous turn, because you can touch and then touch again for 1 mana cheaply enough to do it again, but even then that wouldn't have killed the Void Touched, right, on the other side, so there was no play that alive, and my initial instinct, he just died, was correct.
Generally is. And Seiko, I mean, got off to a great start there. That's pretty much what you want, right? The double attendant. And even though he ended up just doing hero power for the next 2 turns with that 1 tradable on turn 3, that sounds weak on a general priest game plan. You don't want to spend the next 2 turns doing hero power unless it's with Tour Guide. But the fact it was double Void Touch and they weren't dying just makes up for all of that damage you would miss by not playing minions. So really big game 1 win there. But Floki's going to come back very quickly with arguably the counter Q here, right? With the Quest Shaman, a really good matchup for Quest Shaman, I would say. Just so many great answers in the form of spot removal that lines up very well, taunt minions, and lifesteal with those Canal Sluggers.
Yeah, I do think there's a little potential with this build of Priest to be slightly better in this matchup, though, because of the extra juice that you have from higher health minions, the Dragonmore Overseer, the big Mancrics that are coming down. Potentially, Mancric itself is a 4 health base that can be buffed to 5 or 6 with the other buffs that you have in the deck. So I think this is a little bit of a chunkier build of Priest, which can resist some of the removal from Shaman a little bit better. But honestly, I think the reliance on Perpetual Flame in this matchup is somewhat overstated from Shaman anyway. Like I think, for example, like Coin Serpent Shrine Portal, for example, you're probably just winning most of the time if you get that level of tempo swing through in the early game, as long as they haven't had an incredibly explosive start. So I still agree with the assessment that Shaman would be a big favorite in this overall. But I do think maybe there's 1 or 2 tricks in the deck for Seiko that he can pull out here.
Yeah, it's what I was mentioning earlier, right? Like, I'm just interested to see how this deck performs because on paper, although it's not the favorite version of Priest for everyone, it's doing all the things you want to do in the hard matchups, right? So we'll have to see how it pays off. Double Coulter and Chaplin in his opening hand. I imagine he's going to go bye-bye. And gets rid of everything but one. Okay. Not a bad start there, just glancing from Seiko. One drop into Coulter in.
Yeah,
good to me.
Pretty disgusting start from Floki, though, it has to be said. One Maker Serpentrine is about as good as it gets. Ooh. Point Overseer is also quite exciting here, though, but having seen the Wand Maker come down on the other side, he will probably not be doing that, because obviously he just gets contested straight up.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because it just depends what he thinks the general response is. I think you have to plan around Serpentrine Portal a lot of the time on curve. I think, as you mentioned, that's one of the really problematic options your opponent can do. He's just going to keep the turn simple. This does keep coin for him as well. How is it going to have to just be Serpentrine 2-3 and then... What about you? I think it's actually worth the bump on the 1-6, right? Depending on what jumps out of the portal, of course.
Yeah, it seems reasonable as a baseline though, but obviously you can adapt to what the 3-drop is. I still don't hate the bump, to be honest, especially since it's a 4-attack minion on the other side. Even if a ping or a tour guide ping were to come out here, you'd still have the 4-3 available to clean up the rest of the 1-6. Plays around Wriggling Horror a little bit, for example, on the other side, because you cut into the health total just that little bit while you can take a value trade instead of the clean trade coming back on the other side. I think I probably would have liked to have seen it.
I'll drop Dragamot, make a chunkier minion on Psycho's side of the board now.
And this does make some sense, even though there's very easy trades on the Overseer. The breakpoints now on the Freshman are actually very nice, considering the board state on the other side. But this hand from Floki has absolutely no shortage of options.
Yeah, even just to keep it simple, looking at Serpentrine, the 2-2 go face. Start playing aggressive. Yep. I don't think that 3-8, although it's frustrating and obviously going to take a value trade versus the 4-3, I think overall, Floki's in a good spot. He's just winning on board if he did that massively.
Very true.
We go digging instead. I'm just not sure what he could dig for that would make a big difference here.
Yeah, well, he does get the instant unlock this turn, which would have allowed him some slightly higher tempo plays depending on what the guidance were to give him. I did look at this as well. My initial instinct was to try and make something happen where you could unlock and then play the Serpentrine, but he was 1 mana short of doing any of that even with the unlock. So I think he was just going for something a little bit higher tempo, and having picked up the overdraft, honestly, like, he can potentially still have done some work, but choosing just to cycle that away in the end. And this is the issue with this build of the deck, it has to be said. Like, the other version of the Priest is very finely engineered to the point where basically every turn you can vomit your entire hand, right? And then you're just relying on Raise Dead and Elucia or Gandling at some point over the course of the game to be that one big power play that your opponent can't keep up with. This version of the deck is just a little bit clunkier. You see multiples of the cards in hand. Thrive in the Shadows in the hand, Dragmore Overseer was in the hand. Just expensive cards. I mean, it costs 2. Calling it expensive seems a little bit ridiculous. In comparison to the 4-0 drops that the other version of the deck plays, it does mean that sometimes your hand just gets a little bit bogged down with resources. And even then, on top of that, like, do you really want to be spending mana to ping in that situation either?
Make a 4-9 Seiko, let's go. If he had a different 1-drop that was actually an active minion, like 1-drop plus coin wriggling would have been fantastic here, right?
Yeah.
Misses out on the buff because he had exactly Homunculus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been an awkward pan out for sure, but kind of what I'm alluding towards, is that this deck can run into a little bit more awkward situations. I think, you know, the peak of the deck, the coin Mancrick into Thrive in the Shadows, into the Wife, and then an extra 1-drop, and then you drop your Megatron or whatever we're calling it now, and then the Raised Dead comes out, and you get another Mancrick back and just do the same thing again, right? But that ceiling of the deck is way higher than some of the other builds. It's just you pay a price for that with just some of these little clunky draws that you can end up with.
What's a Megatron? I know we make up some funny names for things. I don't recall ever being discussed with us to agreeing on what Megatron is.
Why is it? Well, there's an Earth Elemental, first things first. Twilight Deceptor, Derek was talking earlier about how Lorinda, I think, accidentally called it Decepticon 1.
Oh!
Now Derek just thinks of Transformers every time he sees it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Can see it. Seiko might have to start using these Thrives just for Raised Dead at this point, right? Like, just to have stuff to do.
But even then, his Raised Dead is not like the explosive potential that we're used to seeing, right? It's like pick up a Dragonmaw Overseer, play a 3-mana 2/2. Cool. You know, it's really not doing the...
Get a Wriggling Horror as well.
He wants it to do. Yeah, true.
Could just decide to go wide now. He knows Floki is at least reasonably limited next turn because of the 2 overload.
Guide my hand.
Could just play Void Touched and Traveling. It's not great though. Misses a ping.
I think you're just having a bad time this game, aren't you? I think whichever way you reflect on this, it's not going to pan out in a way that favours you.
Boys, as I was looking at, like, Thrive, Raised Dead, and the Overseer gives you a 6/6. That probably gets to hit the Elemental, then you can ping it. At least, like, is that good enough just having a plan to kill this thing for now and then hope the rest of the game starts to go your way? I don't know. Really tough turn.
I like that my head is in the same place where Floki's is, because you all know I am a Vivid Spores enjoyer, but I'm looking at this, I'm like, that's just another Earth Elemental. I mean, pay 4 mana, 0 overload for an Earth Ellie, it's a pretty good deal. Yeah. Floki sees the lines. This is the way. Absolutely love it. He does trade the 4-attack minion, though, which does open up the ping on the other side. I was honestly considering still just going into the 3/4 instead. I think because he has the security of just a whole fresh Ellie coming back next turn, it's not really that big of a deal.
Ping obviously too good not to do this turn there for Seiko.
Yes.
So almost got to spend the 2 mana at least, but he does have reasonable refill. We can see Lightning Storm and such on this side, but again, those health buffs going to come in a little bit useful here.
Now spell damage Lightning Storm can start to make a pretty big mess of this as well. A little bit too expensive to be weaving in the Serpent Shrine as well, which would have been glorious this turn.
Could start Guidance though, just to see what's in the box, because
true,
there are some options that might change his mind about exactly how to do the turn.
Yeah. Does prevent you from playing Wand Thief though, just for additional tempo, which is kind of where my default play is at right now. Just do the Mini Mage Storm, just say that does enough, and just drop Wand Thief for an extra 2/2 to contest the board. It's up Chain Lightning.
Yeah, he gets to clear now, right, with Lightning Storm?
Would he?
Little time.
Wouldn't
No,
he?
it'd still be one minion surviving, would there not?
Yeah, he just trades the Elemental.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. If you're using the trade as well, then yes.
It guarantees the 1/1 lives, which means he's just not going to trade and be like, no.
Yeah, no.
Damage to the face.
Right. This is why when you said he clears the board, my brain was like, no, he didn't. Because I don't think in any world are you trading that last minion into the last minion, right? When it's an Earth Ellie, so I think you're going for
I've seen big minions trade into 1/1s before, so it's happened. Don't feel good about it, but it's happened. But most importantly, that game just happened, and Floki has managed to fight back with the Shaman again. It's a tough matchup for the Priest. It is winnable, but a lot of the time things have to go quite well for the Priest player and not so well for the Shaman. But Floki had tons of options in the early game. We could even see there when the game ended, still had plenty of options to respond to almost anything that Seiko could have done. And on the flip side of that, Seiko's hand got quite clogged up very early on, right? And he couldn't really even really use those visions or anything like that to really get the deck doing what he wanted it to do, mainly because of lack of Mankrik.
Indeed, yes, and as mentioned, it's kind of the price you pay with that build of the deck, but we're going to move on now to this Handlock. As mentioned before, I think the most interesting addition is that one of School Spirits. He is playing a Rust-Rot Viper, which is kind of an interesting tech card as well, but one that we see a little bit more overall. School Spirits in this version of the deck is just not really something that we're used to seeing, and it's one Goldshire Null that has made the way to allow Seiko to fit that in there. And again, it's just classic Seiko deck building, right? He wants more options. He wants more variety, he wants more options, he wants more one-offs. That's generally the way that he puts decks together, and it has irritated me since the beginning of time, but he is an excellent Hearthstone player with an excellent record, so clearly he is doing something right.
Yeah, and School Spirit's just not a terrible AoE anyway, and it ticks a few more boxes, right? Putting the fragments in the deck, then you get to heal additional health, which then can help out with giants and so on. So yeah, still not too shabby. Looking forward to seeing how and if it pays off here for Seiko as he goes into this next game with a Flesh Giant in the opening hand. Not too bad. For Floki though, again, this is the opposite of the previous matchup where Floki's the one being counter-queued to an extent here. Well, has a pretty solid opening himself, right? He can go one drop into that one maker, follow up with Serpent Shrine, and then I guess plan the rest from there. It's pretty aggressive.
It is. Yeah, one more interaction I suppose to talk about with School Spirits and Soul Fragments going in the deck is how that interacts with the two rods that Seiko has, because you can kind of argue it as a positive and a negative. Obviously, with two Soul Fragments in your deck, you have the upside of potentially drawing multiple cards in a turn, which procs your rod quicker. However, if one of the cards that you draw is a Soul Fragment, that's one card that's then not getting discounted, right? So it's whether or not you value that more quickly discounting the hand that you have already or picking up more discounted cards from your deck over time. But certainly it can be viewed as a positive interaction for the deck as well.
Yep, no real surprises here for the early couple of turns. Both players getting quest active and doing the things they can do on turn 2, which is life tap for Seiko. Probably drop down the one maker on 2 here for Floki. Okay, more card draw, not too bad. The only thing Floki's missing now with that lack of Serpent Shrine is just early pressure, because I do think the onus is definitely on the Shaman there to pile on a lot of pressure and then have either removal or damage straight up to end the game, because if the game goes long... Okay, I'll change what I was going to say actually. The Warlock really does well in the mid game. In the ultra late game, if Bracard's down safely and the Shaman has resources, we can talk again. But I think that sort of floating middle game is where the Warlock generally wins the matchup.
Agreed, yeah. I do want to talk about that turn 3 from Seiko, where we just see the tiny little interaction of him cycling his Viper, which I think is one of the reasons why I'm okay with this card being in the deck, and a big reason why I'm okay with Rod coming into the deck, because I think turn 3 is one of the more awkward turns with this deck. If you haven't found Backfire, it's really only Tour Guide in the deck that fills out your turn 3 effectively, right? Where you go tap first, Tour Guide last. So if you don't have that Tour Guide opener, it can sometimes, turn 3 just feels a little bit awkward. You float 1 mana, you feel bad about it. So having just that one extra tradable option in your deck that you can spend 1 mana on that awkward turn 3, I think is a nice way to look at it. And then of course, with most decks now running 2 versions of Rod, that's the dream turn 3, right? Is you just spend that awkward turn 3 just equipping that Rod anyway.
I'll say, with the way this game is progressing, Floki's not having the best of times here. Isn't really pressuring on board, is overloaded at least for now. I did say it before that happened, so it's fine. Whereas Seiko on the other side, because he's not being pressured, he's managed to get enough taps in, and suddenly this Giant, the Anetheron, there's a Neophyte which has a great impact against Shaman, there's Soul Rend in case he needs to clear that board. Like, all the options are just there for Seiko right now. It's like such a great first few turns in terms of how his hand actually looks at this point.
Yeah, it is, and I think the desperation is already setting in for Floki to the point where he was looking at his hand and going, is this really just a charged call turn? And then pumping it up to 5 as best he could. You would think he was even considering just dropping it for a 4-drop there, which is usually phenomenally underwhelming. Get some decent options off the 5s. 5s are very hit or miss. If you hit the Shaman options, you're generally dreaming, but the neutrals are a little bit more awkward to use overall, and obviously there is far more of them, and no such thing as class waiting anymore on Discovers. So in the end, takes an Alar, which I think is a decent option here. The choice was between that and Stranglethorn Tiger, I would imagine. Stranglethorn more likely to get in once, but Alar being more difficult to deal with overall because it will require 2 different removal spells, or at the very least a null and a removal spell, of which, remember, there's only one of in the deck for Seiko.
Yeah, also as well, the Tiger and the One Maker just dying to a Soul Rend in response would be pretty grim, right? And I'm pretty happy for Seiko. He discards 2 cards out of his deck and gets to just clear away the what I think is a fair assumption, as you mentioned, was a pretty desperate turn from Floki, and you just Soul Rend, okay, let's carry on the game. Would have been pretty happy.
Okay, going through the motions this turn. First thing first, fill the hand up. I like where his head's at. He does have that Anethron on the far left. It's whether or not he feels the need to deal with this null, and it looks like he is going to divert in the end and just clear this up. And I think you see the grimace there from Floki. As I mentioned, this is a one-of null in Seiko's deck, and I think this is really one of the only truly effective ways to deal with that empty board Alar, right? Because if Seiko had to throw multiple spells at the 7-3 body and then throw another spell at the 0-3 to remove it completely, he would have been having a pretty poor turn. But it's the tempo swing that really comes exclusively from the null in that situation that Floki was probably most worried about. That's what he got hit by, and it's a real feels bad because it's a single copy.
Yeah, it was a really good turn, actually. I was even looking at potentially just a Netheron and then null, and just null into the Alar. Let the egg proc and not attack, but you gain the Netheron. But this just seems a little bit more efficient, doesn't it? He gets to retain the minion, still has Netheron in hand, at the cost, of course, of using both touches.
Yeah, the fear now is if and when that Netheron gets played, because obviously he's a few cards away now from filling hand up again. And he's going to want to be tempoing Flesh Giant, and probably will feel the need to use a Soul Rend at some point in the future. Although maybe not, because maybe he just gets far enough ahead with big minions that he can dominate the board that way, and then tap back into that 10-card hand to get the Netheron down. And that is a miserable Hearthstone turn to be playing against Handlock, because I'm sure Floki's a good enough player to have tracked exactly how cheap Giants are right now. And he'll be passing that turn back going, well, I've just given my opponent empty board Giant. And yes, that is exactly what you have done.
Also now, because that Neophyte and the Overload, going to be a little bit more limited. Sorry, he's not overloaded. I'm an idiot. I thought he was. But still, Neophyte going to limit just what he's going to be capable of here. Did pick up a Diligent Note Taker and does have the Devolving Missiles you spoke about a little bit earlier today and how impactful they can be against Giants.
Yeah, no, that is true.
Double Devolve, anyone? Doesn't seem terrible, honestly. Maybe he thinks he needs Charge Call with the Diligent Note Taker.
Right, it's kind of where I'm leaning as well. The problem is, again, if it goes like 1 left, 2 right, or even that in this situation, because let's not forget, Flesh Giant low-key buffed in terms of being able to resist Devolving Missiles a little bit more, is that you now have the problem of still having to deal with an enormous minion, and which I think is like an argument we've had before on this broadcast, right? So, oh, you just evolved the Giant, it's sick. I'm like, what? However much it cost back then. It starts off as a 9-drop, whatever stage of Flesh Giant we were in at that point. Like, it's still going to be a massive minion after you devolve it. How do you actually deal with the problem? And that's kind of the position that Floki finds himself in right now.
Yeah. And that's especially rough, right? Because he's facing down Tyrion. Floki doesn't seem comfortable enough to not play the Charge Call, which means this Note Take is kind of left high and dry, at least at this moment in time.
Yes. Might be able to get there with Perpetual Flames, but he'll be holding a huge penalty on Overload at this point if he's going to go for that.
Haven't heard of me.
Where's Seiko going here? Drop down the Tamsin. Just to clear off the...
Drain Souls, I imagine. Yeah.
I was honestly just looking at what happens if he just played a Netheron for 6. Because he has Battleground Battlemaster in hand.
Well, yeah, I was kind of looking at it the same way, but from a different approach as to what happens if he just played Battlegrounds Battlemaster and sent everything.
I did look at that as well. I was scared you'd shower me though.
No,
I kept
mind it.
Oh, he's got totems for the totemic reflection though. You told me, Sol, not to underestimate this card. You tell me how it's going to get him out of this one.
Well, I mean, I guess there's egg on my face. Don't I look like a fool now?
Aha! I guess Perpetual is kind of a win-win, right? Even if it's the Tyrion, he does get to Canal Slogger the Tyrion away.
That's true.
As a worst case. I know I'm defining win very loosely here, Sottle, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
There's no true whiff here with Perpetual Flame.
If he doesn't kill the Tamsin, though, with the Perpetual Flame, and then spends 4 mana on Canal Slogger, he can no longer kill the Tamsin, right? So the Tamsin just gets to live for an entire turn? That's upsetting. Don't like that very much.
Might be the least of his problems, honestly. He knows 2 of the cards in hand are already 0 costs anyway.
True.
Now's the Battleground Battlemaster turn. So look at those 1 attack minions ready to go. He's just easily tons of damage. And this Tidal Wave, although normally a bit of a secret trick in a lot of matchups, if you can get to that turn 8 safely enough, even if Floki could play it, and even if Seiko swings the weapon, it's just not a big deal, right? It doesn't really kill anything. The weapon has 3 charges, so even if he, quote, wastes 1 charge swinging in, it gets healed up. Seiko probably just doesn't care because he's so far ahead. So even Tidal Wave won't be able to dig him out of this one, and I believe he's overloaded next turn anyway, right? So he wouldn't even be able to play it without the help of a bloom.
Yes, indeed. Only overloaded for 1, I believe, with the Canal Slogger on the previous turn, but still, that's enough to be limiting in this position. He just gets a Tyrion back from Raised Dead. That's probably terrible, but it is objectively fun.
Yeah. Look, if we see Tyrion a lot, I'm not against it. We've not seen Tyrion for a long time. I remember when that used to be like game-defining.
Not wrong. Like you're going to go digging here. Note Taker, Zapper, Perpetual Flame is available. Obviously, 2 Perpetual Flames for 4 damage will clean up the Giant, even if that interrupts both times. But there's also the 8/6 to be worrying about on the other side that can interrupt.
But does he really have anything else subtle? Do you see it? If he had 1 more Totemic Reflection, he might have a chance.
No, I'll tell you what, if he had a bunch of Vivid Spores in his hand, that's when we'd be getting a party starters.
That Novice Zapper is immortal.
Exactly.
I think he just has to go for Perpetual. I think in Floki's mind right now, I imagine he's in the state we've all been, where I'm probably going to lose this game, but what gives me the chance at just not randomly taking a win, but you know what I mean, having some percentage of a win here. He's decided that going for this kind of damage on the Giant, generating a minion, he will prop the Overload to get the 3/3 taunt, and just hoping this works out as best as it's not bad.
All right, yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
He has to pass his next turn, but it's not bad.
But yeah, I think rightfully so. About as good as he could have expected there.
It's just lethal, right?
Just Weapon and Battlemaster. Yeah.
Bristleback, Battlemaster, weapon face. Always going to swing the
What
the
is
Ashbringer to the
taking
face.
so long?
Mm-hmm.
Strike! Then strike harder!
I am a nervous wreck today, honestly.
It's been a weird day, but
Yeah.
both from players' perspectives and our perspectives, to be fair. Like, we have called lethals that the players have missed. We have called lethals that haven't been there. But there have also been many weird turns like that where it's like, well, win the game. And they just take a very long time to win the game.
Yeah.
Something in the water here today in European Grandmasters, but Seiko is able to take it down in the end. He goes up 2-1. Floki now has 2 decks defeated. The Shaman, the victim of the counter queue. As you would expect, it's one of the big reasons why Warlock, why Handlock of all varieties is such a good deck right now, is that matchup it does have against Shaman, which is one of the most common decks in the metagame across all formats, right? Across ladder, across Grandmasters, Open Cups, you know, wherever you're playing your Hearthstone. There's a ton of Shaman around, so this is a deck that makes a ton of sense because this matchup, as many times as they want to add 1 mana to Flesh Giant, all that does is turn it from a 0-mana 8/8 into a 0-mana Tyrion.
Sounds good to me. It does mean Floki is going to be on his quest mage, which at least for me, subtle means that he is by no means out of this series. Mage versus Warlock, hotly contested matchup, but I think Mage is by no means on the rough end of the stick in this one. And then afterwards, if Floki takes the win, he'll be going up against the Fell Demon Hunter from Seiko, which again I think is another winnable matchup for the Mage.
Winnable is a word I would accept. I'm not sure if favoured would be a word I'd accept for the quest mage, because I think generally if navigated skillfully by the Demon Hunter in terms of if you're playing minions, which you do want to sometimes because you want to manipulate outcast position, you want to play your Fell Gorges to dig through your deck, shoot them, same turn, get them off the board, use your Immolation Auras or whatever else you have that you're not going to need against Mage to be able to blast them away. And then I think generally just the amount of raw damage output that you have is going to be too much for Mage overall because you slow down their quest completion by so much. But this matchup, yeah, I think is favourable for the Mage. Again, I do think there's windows for the Warlock, and they mostly revolve around the card Cult Neophyte and repeatedly timing those very nicely alongside threats to keep making annoying boards. But I do think overall, time has told that this is a pretty good matchup for the Mage overall.
Yeah, so Floki still has a good chance in this series, or at least a chance. I know we can talk about the Fell Demon Hunter matchup if and when we get there, and we'll just say 2 words though. Deep Freeze can help out quite a lot in that one sometimes. I've had it done to me and it hurts. Both players just getting ready to dive in right now though. Just a reminder, this is match 3 of the day. We do have our 4th match coming up a little bit later with Gabby versus Letta to finish up the day and see who's going to make that final top 4. But for now, giving the focus to Seiko and Floki. Seiko coming off the back of a very strong week last week, being the winner, of course, and now looking to bank some more points to add to the stack. But to do so, he has to take down Floki on this Mage, and already, though, Seiko off to a good start. Ruined Mithril Rod is something he's, of course, going to be very happy to see. But Floki, on the other hand, I kind of like him keeping hold of this Arcanologist. Do you think it's worth the keep, even though generally looking for those flows?
Yeah, I think so. I think if it's being put in the deck, there's no real turn you want to be playing it on apart from turn 2. And I guess now it doesn't directly obstruct from playing Flow, right? Because Flow got the nerf to 3 mana, so you just curve out perfectly this way. But I think we're seeing potentially the shift in dynamic that we talked about yesterday, Raven, where Europe is no longer the Flow region, it's the Rod region, because opening hand Rod for Seiko, no Flow on the other side so far for Floki, but he does at least have the 1 draw still remaining to try and dig his way out of this.
Yeah, we do evolve with the times over here. As, things do start to change. There's the Ice Barrier available, of course, from the draw for Floki there. Got a nice turn 3. Seiko, on the other hand, a bit more of a hard sell to coin out the Rod when you don't have Backfire, especially when there's tap available without using that coin, but I wouldn't hate it, honestly.
Aghast there for a second. Yeah, it's like someone who scares easily watching a horror movie. He had that look on his face.
Me.
In back. Is it you? Okay. He looked like he's trying to hide his face in his t-shirt, you know, so he doesn't have to watch what's on the TV.
Yeah, I'm a wuss when it comes to horror movies. A lot of the time, here's a small, tiny fact, quick. Instead of watching horror films, I'll just read the synopsis because it's less scary. But I am interested in the story, so there you go.
Generally, like, slasher movies or, like, jump scare films really don't bother me at all and don't get to me, but, like, a good psychological horror can bother me for, like, weeks, you know? Like, I'll still be thinking about it, yeah.
Seiko going to get the rod equipped, though, start tapping away, and this is part of the problem with the matchup from the Warlock side, is especially with the giant nerfs, by the time they get the giants active and the big threats active without, as you mentioned, the backup from Neophyte, a lot of the time the Mage has already done what they need to do in that part of the game. I'm not saying they necessarily have Dawngrasp down, but they've jumped through enough hurdles, right, to feel comfortable.
What was the matchup? It was Mage before, wasn't it? Where we were in testing, and Lorinda's like, well, before you do, you can't do anything because Mage just kills you on turn 5. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Just had that same energy just then. And so, well, if you haven't got Dawngrasp in play by turn 5, what are you even doing?
Have an awkward turn here from Seiko, just a whole lot of nothing, right? Does he re-equip the weapon? Is that where we're at? Are we finally going to see the second weapon double charge game?
Wouldn't hate it, to be honest. He needs to start making some form of room.
Wait.
He can obviously do that with a Netheron next turn. He'll be able to dump that nice and easy, no problem. But
yeah, the natural draw, if he doesn't play weapon, will get the Netheron down to 1.
Yep.
Otherwise, would cost him a tap. Feels difficult to just float 3 mana and pass, though. But it's not a matchup where you... Okay, I was going to say it's not a matchup where you want to just chuck minions out. Seiko is not just chucking a minion out. He is going to kill it, get a 0-cost blast, and progress his quest.
Yeah, I do like that. I like doing something this turn, right? Because even though, as you were saying, he draws 1 card next turn, he plays a Netheron, he can then tap, right? It seems fine. The question becomes... then what, right? Because then you're back with a full hand and you
re-equip the weapon.
Yeah, exactly. So I think something needed to be played that turn just to enable space for future tapping. The Tamsin play is a little cute and a little risky. Like, my primary concern over that is that I have found usage of Tamsin when you get into those race situations. Like, sometimes the turn I complete my quest with Tamsin, for example, I can play Tamsin and like double drain soul my own Tamsin, big Tamsin using the little Tamsin, right? Just to be able to get that security of not dying that turn and then maybe setting up for a following turn. So Tamsin being used as healing to buy extra turns is something that is very useful in a lot of situations. But I do definitely agree with the general philosophy from Seiko, which is cards needed to get out of that hand.
Floki going for the Oasis Ally Secret just to have a guaranteed whenever he wants and got the Mana Frost proc. That partner again, generally just a good pickup from the studies if you aren't looking for a very specific spell damage minion like Steward because you want an additional spell. This is just a 0 mana deal 1 additional damage minimum. Did he not get to choose? Oh no, it was Dawngrasp.
That's
I just
3.
linked to Misdiscover, yeah, pretty quick.
God, if you're not even completing quest on turn 6, what are you even doing, Raven?
Losing games of Hearthstone.
Yeah.
There's Neophyte, though. So we can tap a Netheron Neophyte here.
Is. It's good.
And it's a reasonable amount of power into the Dawngrasp turn.
Might just be Coin Giant instead, though, is the
Sure.
thing.
Especially now he knows it's not Mirror Entity. Oh, no, he knew. He knew it was Froststrike because it procced. Yeah, so he knows.
Both of them proc Frost. Yeah.
Knows the secret.
Oh, cool. Backfire even. Okay.
And he can steal Neophyte?
Can still Giant? No. Unless he wants to raise dead.
Tamsin.
I must hasten. Muzzle their magic.
Could raise dead and Shadow Blast his Neophyte? Right?
Yes. He just needs to do the... Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry, this procs his quest, just Shadow
This procs the quest. This is why I thought just the backfire was able to get the giant down, because I thought the second stage of quest was going to go off, but just the blast being done is enough to get this down. And I do like this. I do think this is important. I actually really love Seiko's play. Seiko's play was optimized to a level that I had not seen, but I was concerned when the giant wasn't coming down because this was my first consideration, is get 2 huge threats in play. So even though Seiko doesn't have Battle Master, he's threatening Battle Master to Floki, right? And Floki will have to think twice about just loading up Dawn Grasp here if he didn't have Flurry. Seiko, however, managed to find a whole extra level to that play with getting the Neophyte down at the same time, which was really, really nice in a play that I did not see at all.
Most importantly, though, Floki has a very easy Dawn Grasp Flurry turn.
Yep.
And that's his whole turn, but honestly, that's all his whole turn really needs to be. Wait a minute. Put that First Flame back.
He could go Lab Partner First Flame, kill the Inethron if he really wanted to, right? Deal 6.
He could. But then then he just doesn't get a Dawn Grasp, potentially, right? If the trade happens. I mean, he's probably not bothered, but now he has a 7/7 that needs killing and a Fireball.
Yes. Okay. A deceptively priced Giant, because the previous one was discounted twice by the weapon, so ended up costing Seiko 0 on that turn. Still costing 2.
Touch, does that change much? Can't do. You can't even set up a coil, right, to get him to 10 or anything like that. He's just stuck.
Yeah, that's what I've been desperately searching for as well. Like, the only thing that would have allowed him to coil that I could see before he started spending a bunch of mana was to go Bloodshard Bristleback, School Spirits, Mortal Coil the Bloodshard Bristleback. Which
10 cards!
Is somewhat counterintuitive.
Wouldn't quite do the job, would it? Kind of the usual combination here of a not the best couple of turns for Seiko, even though I think he made the best of those turns. But also Floki just getting that quest done. He just got the quest done, had the Dawn Grasp into Flurry as the safety net turn, and now pick your poison. Deal damage for 7. Eyeball to the face. GG.
I pick the one that kills my opponent, and the only one that kills my opponent. Is that the correct
There's
poison?
still choices. It's the correct one, but you could have just done some First Flames. He had Ice Barrier up. He had that Oasis. He could have continued the game if he really wanted to. There's no time limit.
Yeah, rough game, I think, overall there for Seiko. And I don't think Floki would have been necessarily expecting to win the game that turn, right? Because he probably would have been hoping for card draw, which would have then let him win the game. But just having the 7/7 stick and being able to get lethal with that Fireball was probably a somewhat unexpected outcome. And again, down to the build of the deck, right? Because let's look at those one-offs in this situation. I'm going to keep talking about it, Raven. Second null is a School Spirits direct equivalent, right? And from the standard version of the deck. So that School Spirits that was played that turn could have been a null, which could have been used alongside the touch of the Nathazem to deal 7 damage, clear up the Varden, potentially giving Seiko a chance in that game.
Could have been, but wasn't. So yeah, that's the story of the day, I guess, or story of that game. Seiko going to be moving over to this Fell Demon Hunter, and Sottle, enlighten us as a Fell Demon Hunter player. What's the grand plan with the Mage matchup? Because we all know the levels of damage a Mage can kick out after Varden, right? Oh, sorry, Dawn Grasp. After Dawn Grasp is played, where with that kind of card draw, high spell damage, burst damage, right? So what does Fell Demon Hunter need to do, or what does it do? Because apparently it's pretty favored.
I mean, I'm going to object to that one as well.
Nope,
I think the matchup.
I heard you say literally pretty favored.
Did I? I mean,
probably not, but I'm choosing to say that.
I was just checking. I don't have you pegged as an outright liar, Raven. But if we're going to add that to things as well, then I just know where we stand moving on. But I think the matchup's fairly even, is what I will say. And even though the respective quest completion, if you want to look at it that way, Demon Hunter doesn't actually have the quest, but it does kind of have this quest it's completing of building up a bunch of damage into your Jace or your Il'gynoth, depending on what your hand does. The output from the Mage at the end is a little bit more unbeatable, but Demon Hunter has more ways to disrupt the ability for Mage to get there, i.e. not playing minions. It's hard to do. It's harder to do with this deck than many others, not play any minions into your opponent's spells. But I think you can slow down the quest enough to potentially get there. What I will say, however, is that the Floki tech in this matchup, where he has Arcanologist Ice Barrier package, might be very much to his benefit, because one of the things that is quite hard to beat in this matchup is double Ice Barrier if they just draw both of them very quickly, for multiple reasons. One, because it's 2 Frost procs that they very sorely need, because Frost is the hard one to do if you're playing around it by not playing minions. Secondly, that's just plus 16 health that you do generally have to interact with as the Demon Hunter, unless your Skull hits an Il'gynoth, right? Those are the X Factor matchups where you get the exact discount and you can probably just blow your opponent up for 1 million.
And also, in a weird way, the barriers make it more likely that a Fel Demon Hunter player would try to get minions to hit face, right? Because they feel you need that extra bit of damage to get through barriers. And then if you're playing minions against Mage, you're giving them targets, which again, generally try and avoid. Not saying it's wrong to play minions, as you've mentioned, of course, but just generally try and avoid it if possible. Not really sure what the great turns for this Phoenix will be going forward. I guess there's always the fallback option of if he has Cramp Session, it's a good enough Cramp Session that isn't a Dawngrasp one to pop off with. Outside of that, I think Floki is more just playing it to have something on board and have more options going forward.
Yeah, I agree. There's no like pressing concern in this matchup where you're like, well, I want this cheap spell. I want a lab partner in my hand because I'm going to need to AoE for 4 damage on turn 4 with my fire sale, right? There's nothing really like that in the matchup. So I think he just took the one with highest upside, the most mana efficient one, and just played it out on that turn, which I do think makes the most sense.
Next turn does potentially look a little bit grim for Floki, whereas Seiko also not looking great. Pointing out the Felgorger probably isn't the smoothest thing to do into a Phoenix turn.
No, it might just be necessary to just say you're setting up this Skull win condition, though.
Sure.
Because the I-beam's getting stranded. Like, I certainly would look at a hand like this and try and work out a way where I can, you know, I-beam my own Felgorger and then potentially find some way to blow up my own Moarg as well, but it's just not there, right? Like, I don't want to pay 2 mana for this I-beam from the middle of my hand. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
That's also, like, the extreme, isn't it? Is, you know, we, for example, would say, well, try not to leave minions on board if you can help it. But then if you lean too much into that, you're just playing a terrible game of Hearthstone at that point, right? Like you're just playing badly if you just do certain things at all costs, and those costs are being your chances of winning the game. So yeah, I do agree with you on that one. I think it might just be his plan to just say, I'll get this Skull cooking and then see what happens from there. Oh, good pickup for Floki.
Yeah,
really good pickup.
Intellect straight off the top. I do think, actually, you know, when you say developing minions into the Phoenix might not be ideal, I do think, if anything, it's actually the best time to do it, because it means, for example, this one minion can't get First Flamed and Brain Frozen, right? Because of the spell damage on the other side. So the target for the other spell would need to be the own Phoenix in that position, which at least then takes care of that problem for you.
Was that a bad example, Saul? You could Brain Freeze it first?
Sure, you could Brain Freeze it first in that position.
But you are right. You cannot first flame it and then Brain Freeze it.
Yeah, no, I mean, accurate statement. It couldn't get First Flamed and Second Flamed, proccing over multiple stages of quest to tick fire on both sides.
Trying to clean it up, that's all. Do you think Floki can just leave this up and just drop an Incantus Flow? I'm liking it, honestly. Just take 4. It'll be fine. That's the way I view it, anyway.
Sure.
With Spring Water, it's so powerful. Like, yeah, you take 4 that you didn't need to take, but you can maybe do so many more things in the near future.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, Moarg being dumped. This is all about just engineering that Skull to the left-hand side. I'd just be curious as to how and when he goes about taking this stuff off the board, having now been given the opportunity to do that.
He
does have the opportunity to use 2 I-beams here if he really wants to, but it's like he's just going to leave them in play.
I was even looking at, is there a weird thing where it's like, I-beam, Fell Scream Blast? Does that ever like completely wipe up the board? But that might be a bit overkill.
You wouldn't need all of that, right? I mean, you could have just traded with the 4/3 and then just used 2 I-beams to get your own minions if you really wanted to. But I think, honestly, the kind of hand that Seiko has right now supports a little bit of ambition. Because he has 0 mana Fell Scream, 0 mana I-Beam already in hand. He already has a Talented Arcanist. So if one of the next, well, not the next, if one more card comes out the deck, 2 more cards come out the deck with the Sigil, and then the very next one of the very next 3 cards is Il'gynoth in that position, he's able to skull into it, he suddenly has one of those very impressive looking OTKs built up in hand. So I respect a little bit of ambition here for Seiko, even though he is going to give over quite a few quest procs to his opponent here.
Important here that Floki just plans out the turn. Although this should be basics for our Grandmasters, we have seen the odd slight slip in terms of the ordering here to actually maximize that quest progression. Sometimes it's forced, sometimes you have to, but still.
But you can see the issue with Mage, right? Especially with double flow. Give them an inch and they take a mile. You've given them this one turn with minions on board to potentially just throw some out. And look how much quest progression has been ripped through from Floki on this turn. Ooh, that's a stranded skull, I think, with the first draw off the top. Yes, it is.
Alas, poor Warlock.
Good. Decent. Alright, Immolation Aura is a dumpable one. He was going to need a dumpable card there. Chaos Strike doesn't quite fit the bill, of course, because it does replace itself in hand. So no Il'gynoth, but a lot of auxiliary pieces outside of the Il'gynoth that can build up a lot of damage here.
I imagine he's going to keep hold of that Chaos Strike for the Eldraki turn as well. Because I think it's reasonable to expect taking some damage in the next turn or so.
Yeah, it's the other interaction that we haven't really talked about too much is when it gets to the stage where Dawngrasp does come down on the Mage side. If they don't OTK you, which let's be honest, quite often they do in that situation, you do appreciate that little turn in the middle to be able to have the opportunity to heal back up, right? Yep. Because you can use Arcanists and I-Beams and Chaos Leeches and Eldraki Warblades with Furies and Chaos Strikes to perhaps just present an unexpected health total that your opponent isn't able to deal with, having just used a bunch of fireballs already. Because without the Auctioneer version of the deck, right, it's very rare that Ignites get cast, put in the deck, drawn back out again, and then those same Ignites that got shuffled in are played within the same turn, right? There's normally intervals where each group of Ignites are being played once a turn, right? Unless there's enormous amounts of card draw left in your deck. So if it does come down to that situation, you will quite often find that the Demon Hunter can stabilize for just perhaps an extra turn or two longer, but with double flow, not so much, because the burn is all just so cheap at this point that Floki might just be able to output an OTK when he gets there.
Seiko now just going through this hand and probably trying to just plan out the rest of it, how to maximize Jace when he plans on even playing it, because as you said, I think even though he isn't facing down lethal this turn or maybe even next turn, but he can roughly guess when Dawngrasp is likely to come down and then have some kind of plan for if he needs to do some kind of desperation Jace here. Intellect, another good pickup here for Floki. Just still need to finish off this quest. Any Frost spell I imagine is great for him here.
I mean, Cone of Cold is Frost, but it has the same problem as all the other Frost spells that he has right now.
Yeah, and he can take Prime Order, so he's all Font of Power to get something to Brain Freeze. Looks good to me.
Yep, looks better. Seiko continuing to not attack here. One Ice Barrier is in play, but Seiko's not interacting with it. Not really so much to avoid giving health, although I do think that's on his mind. I didn't really talk about it last turn, but I think Seiko's setup turn on that turn kind of reeks of the idea that he's trying to hit Il'gynoth this game and go that way. Because I think he is planning to just turbo through the left-hand side of his hand again to get back to that skull to try and hit a discounted Il'gynoth to win the game. But Seiko mostly not interacting with this Ice Barrier so that Floki could not use the second Ice Barrier as the proc that he needs for the Frost spell on that turn, which is why Floki had to do something a little more creative with Runed Orb into Primordial Studies, into Minion, into Brain Freeze.
And Floki can just proc the quest. Right, he's got... Oh, okay. He didn't want to go for the Frost proc this turn. Interesting. Does limit his mana next turn, though. I thought... Okay, Sol?
Disaster. I think you saw Seiko's reaction to it as well. I do think this was the plan, is that he wanted to set up that skull into a position where he could potentially hit that Il'gynoth with it, use the one remaining Moarg that he has in the deck to set up OTK damage, but now the threats are stacking up in hand for Seiko, but they're all full cost, and this is going to be a tricky one to navigate around from this position.
I'm still kind of stuck on Floki's turn there. He could have just played Thalnos and Cone, got Frost done, and then he only has Fire, right?
Yes.
Which he has Hot Streak, so he could Hot Streak, Dawn Grasp, go. Now he has to spend 3 mana on the Cone next turn, probably, to even get to Dawn Grasp, and then he's just stuck for the turn. Just interesting, he didn't just throw away a Cone. I'm not sure what the great reason is for like pinging and just floating 2 mana instead. Kind of a strange one, unless I'm missing something obvious. Seiko still trying to dig his way out.
Yeah, and it's another fairly awkward skull, it has to be said. No real clear indication of a win condition with the way that's gone. Didn't get a 0 mana Moarg or anything like that to go along with the Il'gynoth, and he's really been forced to use the other Fellscream Blast that was discounted to 0, which was part of any potential Il'gynoth combo there as well. He's going to find himself in a spot of bother here.
The one small benefit he has with the way these skulls have gone is he can actually Eldraki Warblades, Fury, Chaos Strike, and then still play Jace to do it all, to do the weapon buffs again.
Right.
That's something, for like one big burst turn, but without doing any real damage to Floki in this whole game, that one big burst turn I don't think is really ever big enough, is it? Considering there's still an ice barrier knocking about, of course.
Time runs out on. I wonder.
I think right now Floki is just having that talk with himself about whether or not it's intelligent to sink a bunch of damage into his opponent's face, and whether or not he's likely to be able to kill this turn, how much damage he can do, counting up the fell spells that have gone into the Jace, right? Because that means any Chaos Strikes, Furies, and so on that have gone in, he'll be able to say, well, that's healing out on the other side. And yeah, I think this is a smart decision from Floki, honestly, to essentially do nothing on this turn, because he's can now spend maximum mana next turn on an OTK with those Fireballs, Cram Session, everything that he has in hand, without giving over any opportunity for big heals on the other side from Seiko.
Demons.
Oh, it's really tough because although Seiko's down to 7 cards, it feels like he hasn't done much this game. I'm not trying to like have a go at him or anything. I just feel like the Jace doesn't even feel like it achieves anything, right? Like it's one of those weird spots, and this doesn't often happen this late in a game as Fel Demon Hunter.
And his deck has been trolling him, it has to be said, because I think Seiko has adapted win conditions on the fly, where he's been like, okay, I just need to hit a discounted Il'gynoth, boom, Il'gynoth appears in hand. Okay, it's just a little expensive, it's still good, we just need discounted Moarg, boom, full cost Moarg comes into the hand, you know, like, it's just piece by piece, all of his win conditions are being slowly snatched away from him in this position. And you can see, I think, from how underwhelming this Jace is going to be, that it's probably just not going to get there.
Where are the barrages, Sol? That's my question.
That is the question. Buried deep in the bottom of the deck, and in the end, Dawngrasp not even going to bite the dust here, which would almost trivialize the lethal from this point, you have to imagine.
Yeah.
Because that is 18 from Fireballs already. Cram Session can be ripped.
Floki can make some space using this Flurry. Cram Session, and it's just likely he's dead. Maybe even certain at this point. But still, more than enough damage. Floki with a double flow earlier on. Made it work, and that's the relief. Floki knowing he's going to move on to the next stage. Move on to the final day of this week of the European Grandmasters. Seiko, unfortunately for him, calls it a day and calls it a weekend. But after his performance last weekend, he can chalk up another decent performance here and getting a few more points on top there. So not bad at all for Seiko, but a nice, great win there for Floki.
Yeah, awkward last game overall there for Seiko, and it's kind of been one of those days in Europe Grandmasters where we're not really used to seeing, where multiple players have just seemed unsure in certain spots. They've been put in difficult positions. They haven't quite, covered themselves in glory when it's come to those difficult positions. You see here from Seiko kind of roping out a Jace and then ending up leaving a 7-1 up on board. I think in the end, even if you'd have done that at the start of the turn, like, what are you going to do? Swing your 18 damage weapon into the 7-1 and not push that damage face at that point? Like, I mean, come on. What's your win condition at that point? But it was a very difficult game to navigate because the deck was trolling him just that little bit. But it has been the story of the day, I would say, on all fronts, that everyone's been off their game a little bit in the European region.
Yeah, us included.
I said, from all angles,
yeah, that's what I mean.
Been off
I just
their
want
game a little.
to make sure that's certain. Us included. As you can see there, that's 3 of our top 4 players decided for tomorrow. We've got 1 more to work out. It's going to be Gabby versus Letta. And I am sure Gabby does not want Frenetic to overtake him and grab first place and secure first place for this week at least. So